it also, to me, it kind of feels cooler to be just like a guy with a hammer going up against like the Lord of Evil, you know?
Yeah.
It's kind of a nice underdog feel.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 409 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm not a programmer.
Got him. This is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is March 31st, 2023.
I would like to submit a bug ticket to whoever made the fucking calendar. Every time I hit a 31, I'm just like, what is this? And then there's 28.
Too many days.
What?
I'm a big advocate for the calendar that is 13 months. Have you guys seen this?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I feel like we gotta start preaching this message. And I'm pretty sure I've mentioned it at least once in the podcast, but it's worth mentioning again.
Yeah.
It's 13 weeks, 13 months. Every month is 4 weeks. Mm-hmm. Okay. So every month is 28 days, which means Sunday is always the first day of the month. Mm-hmm. Monday is always the second day, et cetera, et cetera. So you can extrapolate from the date what day of the week it is.
Just pure chaos of like, there's no
every
alignment
month
of
is the
anything.
same. Now, there's one thing that happens, though, which is that there's one day left over. It just does,
That's free time.
365.
You know?
Yeah. So that day, it's not even on the calendar.
No, it doesn't exist.
That's a free day. Mm-hmm. Doesn't exist. Nobody can have you go to meetings. There's no appointments.
So I haven't seen the Purge movies, but is this the premise of the Purge where there's a day that doesn't count? And so just anything goes.
And on leap years, you get two. You get two free days.
2 purges.
So this is actually in the book Red Mars by Kim Stanley Robinson. It's a science fiction. It's like a hard sci-fi. It doesn't, like many of his books, it doesn't actually have like a story. It's just like, hey, what would it be like for people to be living on Mars? Mm-hmm. And then it's just like following people around as they do things. But one of the interesting things is that a Mars day is like 40 minutes longer than an Earth day. And so the way that the Martians, the people living on Mars, treated that was they still used a 24-hour day, and their clocks just stopped moving for 40 minutes during that time, and they just got like a free like chunk of time where
honestly, yes,
they can just chill. And that way it's like you get extra sleep or you get extra time to do your thing, and then their clocks are kind of like synced up with Earth clocks.
I mean, it basically feels like they have that daylight savings effect every day where it's like, they
just get free time.
But they couldn't be synced up with Earth clocks and have an hour where time doesn't exist.
I can't remember the specifics of it, but like the end result is like having that little extra time, but still trying to like keep yourself synced up with Earth just meant that the way that you ended up doing things was you kind of just gave yourself some 0 hours every now and then. Like they're just free hours.
It's like island time,
back in sync. That would make just think about this from a programming perspective, because like we need timestamps and everything so we can tell. So because that would mean that if you were trying to program stuff in that sort of twilight zone, where time doesn't move, then you're like, what order did things happen in? There's no way to know.
Oh man, it's even worse because now if you're talking about trying to say when did something happen, but now you've got some people on Mars and some people on Earth, and there is a light delay of between 8 and 20 minutes, depending on where Earth and Mars are in relation to each other, right? And so, like, you would have to.
Right, but it's variable throughout the. It's not over a year because like they're on different periods around the sun, right?
It's like 18 months or something like that.
It's even like worse now.
Right? Yeah. So what you'd have to do is like you have to look at the timestamp for like when it was sent, but then you have to extrapolate that based on orbital mechanics.
Are you basically saying that, while we complain about time zones being annoying, it could be worse?
Oh, it's going to get worse.
It is just, it's one of those things where we're already at the point, as soon as we were distributed around the planet.
The whole planet? Yeah.
Yeah, it was already the case that we just needed basically like UTC, right? Where everybody just uses one clock and one set of times and just does things at different times. It's so weird that we're like, no, work has to start at 9 a.m. Like no matter where you are. Like that's the thing we decided to fix, It's fucking weird.
It's bizarre too because 9 a.m. doesn't even mean anything in relation to like, for example, when the sun comes up.
It doesn't mean anything anywhere.
that happens at different times.
Well, then if you're in like Texas, right, Texas is one time zone, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it's wide as shit. So if you're
is it like a 30-minute difference between sunset on each side or something crazy?
Probably at least.
Yeah. It's going to be
probably
huge.
more.
So like, the time is no, and like, so the reason we all try to, we try to fix the time or like know what the differences are so that people can know when things are happening and do things roughly the same time and sync up, whatever, right? But people tend to start doing things roughly in the morning and end, sometime in the early evening or late afternoon or whatever. And like, that's just gonna be a sliding frame as you move across the planet.
Well,
whether you try to chunk it out or not, like it doesn't really. It's just stupid.
I think it does make sense in one way, which is like, let's say we're talking to people in London, which we do pretty often actually, right? Mm-hmm. And knowing that they're a 6 hour difference, right? Like I can say that, if it's like 8 a.m. here, then it's like 2 p.m. over there, right? But which I can kind of extrapolate and know like, okay, it's kind of like toward the end of their workday or whatever. If we didn't have time zones and it was all the same number,
then you'd have to know what
then
number
I think it would take a
morning. Right.
Yeah,
I got you.
I would have to kind of like do a bit more work to reverse engineer when it's.
I think, this is a cursed design problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As they call it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's no good solution. I just think the solution that we've landed on is way more complicated than just everybody uses the same fucking clock and you just do things whenever it makes sense.
Here's the
based
solution.
on where the sun is for you,
We pick a couple mile wide zone, okay? And then you
wide
goes
north south.
I don't know how wide, like east to west, okay? And then you basically turn that into the livable zone for the whole planet. Okay, everybody's got to fit in there, just distributed it on this one line. That way, everyone's in the same time zone. Problem solved. And then the whole rest of the planet, you just don't go there.
So
let it go to wilderness.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
It's way simpler than all this time zone.
I mean, I saw a visualization where someone was like, if you took all of the people on the planet and you put them into a spherical ball of meat.
Yeah.
Then it would only take up like what was it? It was like
it would fit in
mile or something.
Or it would fit in the Central Park.
Yeah, it fits Central Park, like all the human bodies, right? So now if you imagine
all the human meat,
taking that,
gross.
although volumes, versus areas are pretty tricky. So I don't know what happens once you unspool that down a line down the planet. If that's
there's that line city that they're building in where I don't know.
Is it Dubai or something or
Dubai,
somewhere?
Where they got
it's
a lot of oil
they're
money.
not really building it. It's it's just a thing.
One of those.
I mean,
models.
but that's what I'm saying. You could fit a lot of people in a line. You know what I mean? That's their whole point.
That's true. Imagine the traffic jams in a city that is just one long line. Like everybody who wants to go literally anywhere has to take the same road.
Well, no, there would be roads. There can't be roads. That's the thing, right?
Well, it's actually 3D though, because it's a line, but instead of spreading out in 2D width, they just keep on adding floors as you go up, so.
Yeah, but imagine taking the subway from one end of this thing to the other, and it's like, okay, there's 340 stops because, every single stop is on the way. You need like stacks of trains that like go different distance. I don't know. It was just why? Anyways, we need to, all right, let's talk about it.
Actually, I think it'll be dope.
Either we're off track or very on track, but profanity warning. That there both has been and will be profanity in this show.
Was there some? Matter. I have no idea.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
it would be weird if there wasn't, because it's just part of speaking.
It would be weird. All right, so what we want to talk about today is because we've spent so much time kind of talking about AI and all kinds of other stuff. We're gonna take a step away from that for just this week, probably.
Yeah. And now this is the time zone podcast where we just complain about time.
Where we just talk about, so we're talking about daylight savings time, calendars, appointments, clocks, whatever, like 12 hours versus 24. I don't know. Anyways.
Honestly, I feel like I could complain about this for at least 400 more episodes.
I could write a book about things I hate about time and clocks.
Yep.
Anyways, let's talk about Diablo 4.
Yeah.
How about that?
So I played it. That's the short version. I played.
Well, you played the beta.
Yeah, I played the
beta, which was out for like a week, I think.
They basically did 2 back-to-back weekends of beta play, and they changed which classes were available for the second weekend. So basically allowing you to play the Druid and Necromancer class the second weekend, which were not available the first time. So a little bit of background, Diablo 4 is it's the follow-up to what is, I think at this point, probably what you call like the largest kind of hack and slash RPG game that exists, which is all about fighting demons, making loot come out of their bodies, putting that loot on your body, and then fighting more demons with that. It's like the simplest power loop, but a very, very satisfying thing. It's made by Blizzard. And one of the things that's always been fun about it is that kind of randomization of loot as well as class specialization. So you pick what you're going to be. Are you a sorcerer? Are you a necromancer? Whatever. And then you go off and basically do a bunch of demon murder, right? So it's about killing large amounts of enemies and kind of having that shower of loot as well as shower of special effects, which Blizzard does very well. The difference is...
Weirdly, one thing you don't do in this game, actually take a shower, even though you've been absolutely murdering grotesque things for
that's very true.
Dozens of hours. No bathing. It's kind of a problem.
I think you rely on the flying loot to cleanse your body and your soul. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as you get struck by gold coins as they whip past you, they wick the grime away.
And all the magic that you're constantly casting, right? Because you're casting magic outwards and it blows the dirt off.
Yeah, it probably shakes the dirt loose.
Yeah, it probably does. I don't know where magic comes from, but I feel like it's got to start.
Pores. It just comes from your pores.
So it's very cleansing.
Yeah, because you drink. Like the implication is you drink it, right? Because it makes a glug sound like the mana potions, you know? So that means it does have to come out of you.
It's a biological process. Yeah.
It's good stuff. But yeah. So I gave it a try and I really enjoyed it actually, which was surprising because the Diablo 3 was good, but had a bit, I don't know how to phrase it, but like it had a bit more of a high fantasy vibe to it in terms
Diablo 3 felt like it was whimsy.
Yeah.
Even though it has like dark themes and like a lot of like gross zombies and stuff, it felt like when I showed up, I punched a zombie and somebody came in like, wow, you're the coolest, biggest, bravest person I've ever seen.
Yeah,
so totally, everything is about me. You know?
Yeah, totally. The third one was a bit too of that, like, just, I don't know, you're the chosen one, you're definitely going to win sort of vibe. Versus this one, they did a really good job on nailing that kind of just the grim and dark kind of medieval tone, and the lighting is great, and the storytelling is actually really fun. They have all sorts of cutscenes and just very enjoyable. But one thing I thought was interesting that I wanted to touch on briefly was that when it comes to the combat, they have a problem which a lot of games have and try to figure out exactly what to do with, which is that if you're creating a game like this with a variety of classes you can play as, right? Basically, players are opting into a play style at the start of the game, right? You're saying, I'm going to go with this particular kind of play. I don't know exactly what it is, but let's say a necromancer versus a barbarian, right? The idea is you're
like, I'm just going to be romancing necks the whole time.
Just that's my whole thing. Smooching those necks or barbing, you know?
Yep.
Shaving heads, one of the two. And they're kind of really very different things at the end of the day. So as designers, the whole goal is to kind of understand what it would mean for someone to look at those and say, I want to play that, right? And then how to like make that into a fun play style, given that it cannot be like the other ones, right? See, that's the whole point. It's supposed to be
make them
a unique experience.
Practically equivalent in terms of like
efficacy,
the quality and efficacy and type of overarching power building experience, I guess, right? While being completely different in moment to moment experience.
Yes, and this is very tricky. And the reason why typically if you see class-based gameplay, there's only a couple because you start having a lot of overlap issues, right? It's very challenging to basically really strictly define them as separate when the reality is they are constrained by the ability of the game in terms of its design to make fun. Like you can't have a class, for example, that doesn't kill things in Diablo. It doesn't make any sense because it's what the game is, right?
Yeah, this is why in so many video games, you just don't really see like a bard class, right? Because like in D&D, there's enough imagination and cheesing of things by the DM that a bard can come in and sort of like not really be focused on combat or whatever, but they can just kind of like charisma and music their way through situations, which is a very complicated thing and actually looks nothing like what everybody else does.
Yeah. Yeah. It's largely a support class. Yeah. So the challenge then is very big. And I think while they nail the feel of certain individual classes. So, you know, if you play as a necromancer, you're exploding corpses all the time, raising the dead, cursing people, shooting bone spears out. It's exactly what the fantasy of being a necromancer would be. I think the challenge is that in classes that are a little more down to earth, like a barbarian, essentially the melee classes, tend to, I think, as always, suffer from essentially it comes down to a lack of imagination, I think is the best way.
Yeah, it's like how many different angles and speeds can you swing a stick at something?
Exactly.
And call those different abilities.
Exactly. And so I'm curious to see how it plays out and how they kind of rebalance things heading into the launch. But I know that was both my experience. I played it on the Rogue and I played a Necromancer a bit. And actually the Rogue's very well done too. It's got a lot of variety in terms of how you can approach situations. You can put down traps, you can be stealthy or just sort of, come in daggers flying all over the place. But from what I understand about both the Druid and the Barbarian, if you kind of stick to the melee focused elements of the Druid, then it's kind of samey. You just kind of walk around, just smash everything as a bear, basically.
Barbarian.
A barbarian. So I think it's one of those wrinkly ones where it's like it would be very fun to play as a barbarian conceptually, but when you get down to it in terms of what that means in the soup that you have made, for yourself, the big design, how do you make that particular experience actually fun without like adding some kind of bigger, I don't know, mystical element to it or something,
Yeah, well, and there's the challenge of like the game is one thing.
Yeah.
Right. The game is one thing, and there's technically like one way to beat the game, which is kill everything.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And but what it means to kill everything can be kind of different. So, like for example, if you have if the game is delivering large numbers of kind of weak enemies, then having a character that can just hit lots of things at once for kind of like smallish amounts of damage, that character is going to be very successful, right? If you've got a different character who hits one thing really hard, and maybe like the longer they hit that one thing, the more damage they do, right? They can like funnel damage in, then that character is going to really suck against these large numbers of enemies. On the flip side, if the game is all about like defeating big bosses that take a while to beat, right? Well, then now the advantages are flipped. But in a game like Diablo, you want to have variety. Like you want to have
big
situations
bosses
where you have a boss fight and situations where you have large numbers of enemies. So how do you make the classes be distinctly different from each other in terms of the way that they play and what they're good at and bad at, but still make it so that the player feels like they are doing well and can succeed and overcome all these challenges, And so you can't just have a class that's like really bad at one thing and really good at another thing.
They all have to be flattened out a bit.
Yeah, they all have to be like slightly worse at some things and slightly better at other things. And then at that point, the only difference you do is just like flavor, right?
Yeah.
Like you're saying, like
being
a bear and being a barbarian is you just run in and just kind of whack things, but it feels different because one of them has a big axe and the other one is a bear, right? Yeah. And so there's lots of like differences in animations and sounds and particles, and it does feel different, but it's kind of the same.
I do say I do love how they did the Druid shapeshifting in this one, which I'll just touch on very briefly, just from like an FX standpoint and an art standpoint, which is that when you use a bear skill, so you have maul, and you use that skill, if you're not already a bear, then basically it's almost like a bear flesh suit sort of like grows onto the character. You turn it, and then after a brief amount of time, if you haven't used a bear skill for a while, then it like melts off. It's the coolest shit. I'm like, I don't know who did that, but
that sounds dope.
Give that person a raise. That's fucking excellent. That's really good. Really good stuff. So
that's weirdly, I find that to be a more compelling thing than like you just are.
You know how in
not. Yeah, or like the thing that always bothered me in something like the Avengers, where you've got the Hulk, is that he just becomes enormous and extremely dense and heavy. But like, where is that coming from? Like, where is all that extra matter coming from? But if you've got this druid and kind of like a bear flesh suit kind of like forms up out of the ground, or it's like, okay, like maybe there's like material in the ground that it's like comprised of or whatever.
Yeah, that's very fun.
But okay, so I mean, do you feel like you're going to pick it up when it launches?
Yeah, I definitely will pick it up when it launches. I think overall it does things very well. So I think it'll be fun to play as. I do think it's one of those ones that your mileage will vary depending on which class you start playing as. You know what I mean? Like take some time to pick, and because the experience is actually very different.
Well, I think like Diablo 3 had that same problem, and I think it's also it's designed as a single player game basically, right? Because it's online, you could play with multiple people, but it's not designed around the assumption that there's like a class distribution. So unlike all your like team based shooters that have each person can choose one class or whatever, they have these like really different classes that are well designed to work with each other, so you can
more specialized, basically.
Right? Yeah. So it can't be that, and I think they kind of suffer from the idea that like they can't not have a barbarian class, right? Because of like
crazy
historical, like they got to have that in there, and and I think it does create that problem because this is a problem that I had in Diablo 3 is I played a lot of it with my wife, and she played the sorcerer class. And I always like the melee classes because they're brain dead simple. I can just get in there, just fight stuff, and not think about it.
It also to me, it kind of feels cooler to be just like a guy with a hammer.
It's really satisfying.
Like the Lord of Evil, you know?
Yeah.
It's kind of a nice underdog feel.
Yeah, it's just very fun. But it was the case that as the game, like at the beginning, we were kind of equivalent. But as the game progressed, the sorcerer has this like fucking cannon, just like laser cannon, right?
Oh yeah, it's like a ray of
it just like
arcane magic or something.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like the sun. I don't know. It's just like it's so fucking powerful. And it got to the point where she's like, my wife's just like mowing down hordes before I even like get there, you know. And then all of a sudden, it's just like absolutely not fun anymore, right?
Because she also teleports in front of you, and you're like,
"Yep,
all right, what is this? You got mobility,
and all I got is like I got to get in there to do something, right?" And it was basically because like those two classes, like if you're just playing those two in like a regular game of Diablo 3, right? They're too asymmetrical in a way that doesn't actually work together. It's like the opposite of a team-based class or a class-based team shooter, right? Where the differences can actually make the team experience. Because if I was just in there by myself as a barbarian, like, it's not as cool because I'm not blasting the sun at things, right? But whatever, I can just get in there, and do melee. By yourself, and so I think I'm curious to see how the sort of close-range, long-range difference in Diablo 4 comes out, like when you're playing with other people, because I mean, it's Diablo. I love the franchise. I'll be playing it the moment it comes out. My wife and I, and I got the question of like, do I need to be really careful ahead of time and choose a class based on what my wife wants to do also?
I would say yes.
So that we're like both, and then do I need to like be like both short or both long range? Is that basically the strategy, you know, to make that work? I don't know, but probably.
I think that'd be wise.
Yes. Yeah. Something I thought was kind of an interesting trajectory that, because I always felt this was kind of strange playing like D&D or like Dragon Age or like any kind of RPG that like you've got characters that do magic and then you've got characters that have a stick. And it just, there's just no scenario that you could imagine where like somebody who just is strong can compete with somebody who can launch the power of 1,000 suns, right? And so one of the things that has happened kind of over the years in World of Warcraft and their kind of lore with their like warrior class, which has kind of historically had this problem of like, how do you compete against magic users? And they kind of established this interesting lore of like the warriors actually kind of like work with these godlike beings that are they're kind of like Viking gods, like Odin and stuff. And they bestow upon them sort of like powers from time to time, or even like enchanted weapons. So like you can like summon this axe that flies behind you and like whips around like a tornado, and you can like bring it into, you know. So there's always kind
like
of
a Thor's hammer situation, right? Where it's like
just chuck it.
Yeah. So it's like the warriors are not magical, but they kind of like have the backing of powerful magical beings, and then otherwise they're just strong and mad, that's cool.
Well, I think in a magic universe too, like where magic is just a thing, it makes sense that you would differentiate where it's like you have people who control magic, which is now your sorcerers and stuff, right? And then people just who are magical, like there's
people who are like infused with magic.
So you can have barbarians who are just magically strong. It's like when they're doing like a whirlwind attack, it's like creates a literal whirlwind because they're really fucking strong or whatever, right? And I think that's a good way to take it, which actually Diablo has tried to do. I don't know.
They've leaned into that quite a bit.
I don't know how much Diablo 4, but was it a free beta weekends? Like
no. You basically you pre-purchase it.
Oh, so if you pre-order the game,
I'm gonna
you could be in the
Do you know, I admit I didn't play it. I've played all the Diablo games, and I'm a general fan of many of the things that Blizzard has made, but I didn't pre-purchase Diablo 4 because I've decided to just stop pre-purchasing games, kind of, period. Just after all the things that have happened.
I did it only because I could play it. You know what I mean? So it was like, I pre-purchased it, but I
also
played it.
Just play it.
When does the
like a
actual
purchase
launch? Do you know?
I believe it's in June or July. It's December sometime,
Okay, so it's not too far away.
All right. Well, we'll see. We'll check it out when it launches. So I think we want to get into some questions this episode because we haven't done that in a while. So these questions come from podcast.bscotch.net. And the highest upvoted question for today comes from Gibbs, who says, do you consume any content from other game developers about the creation of their games?
Ooh. We used to a lot. Like in the earlier days, we were kind of reading everything that we could. These days, I know I started programming. So I've now joined Seth to try to help do some game programming. So I've gone back to start actually consuming stuff about creating games, but really focused on like game maker tech, right? So more of a tech focus than like a game making focus. But that's really all I'm doing these days. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, it's more about like looking at communities like over the Game Maker Kitchen Discord. Yeah. And kind of like it's not about like watching somebody stream making their game or like reading somebody's dev blog, because those things are not really for other game developers in a lot of cases. They're more like kind of like trying to build hype about the game or whatever. And they're not really specifically meant to be useful for other developers. It's more just like it's the developer kind of like just talking through some of the things that they're working on or whatever, right? And we've been at this for long enough that the kinds of problems that we have are often very hyper specific to what we're doing, and trying to, like, if we're just kind of like passively watching what another developer is doing, the likelihood of them coming across something that we are currently dealing with and also haven't solved, the
signal to noise ratio has gotten more challenging.
Yeah. And I think it makes a lot of sense earlier when like most of the things you're dealing with you haven't seen before. And so getting just it's like a fire hose, right? It's like getting all these different pieces of information from all these developers is quite useful because it's all knowledge that you can like throw into the bucket, right? At a certain point, like your bucket starts to fill up and it's harder to find things that fit,
And you'll see this in
the gaps.
In any industry and skill set, it's always the same, right? Which is there's tons of beginner content out there because, and I think, Seth, to your point, like beginners all have the same collection of problems, more or less.
It's a big audience,
which is every problem.
Which is how do you do everything, right? But it's also the same kind of like knowledge set, and because at the very beginning, there's only certain kinds of things you can solve, right? It's like your solution space is really limited until you become more of an expert in the material. But as you become an expert, the whole point of like getting all that expertise and then like going out in the world and doing something with it is to do something that other people aren't doing, right? And so you very quickly find yourself in a position where your problems aren't the same as other people's problems. And as soon as that's true, there just isn't content out there for you.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I've switched mainly to almost like an abstracted level for the kind of stuff that I read up and look into. So I really like watching design videos on YouTube. So I follow Adam Millard, who's the game architect, and Mark Brown from GMTK. They put out really good just kind of design essays on how to do stuff. Or how, like, essentially asking a question like, how does the metagame affect Atomic Heart, in the case of one of the recent ones that I watched from Adam Miller, which is very interesting. And like, I think it starts giving you on the design side, I think those are really useful because it's similar to all these other problems we're talking about. But the reality is when you're working on a game, the things that you're touching on the design side are, again, very specific to that particular game. Like if we were working on Diablo, for example, I'd be doing a lot of thinking about loot and sort of like item customization capabilities, stuff like that. But you wouldn't necessarily be thinking about, things maybe like intense level design or puzzle design. You know what I mean? Like it's not really a piece of it. So it's kind of fun to, every week I watch a few of those videos or whoever kind of puts them out to see, just kind of keep that general soup of design knowledge.
But it's more of like an analysis perspective then, right? It's less, it's not, you're not looking at like what game devs are telling you that they're doing when they're situation. You're looking at thoughtful, like critique
almost.
Discussion of which is, I think that's the kind of stuff that I've done too. Mostly is just, and I do this also for web dev stuff. It's kind of, I do for, I guess, it's basically like the stuff that I get content from, like from developers is always like very technical. If I find something specific to what I'm doing, or that's like pushing into a new, cause like in web dev, everything's changing all the time. So I'm always trying to stay up to date with that. in game dev that at least feels less true. I think it's because so much tech is just like isolated in these game engine silos, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think at the beginning of a project, we did this with Crashlands, when you're still figuring out what your pipeline is and stuff. I did watch a lot of videos on 2D art and animation for games and a bunch of these other things that I found via GDC content mainly. Read up a lot of stuff there that were more on that kind of how are some other people doing this well? Or, you know, how did these people make art for that game that looks really good?
Yeah, for shared problems, though, right? Because that was where it's like...
Or where you're choosing your problems, right? You haven't picked which problem you want to have yet. So that's, I think, the one phase where it also makes a lot of sense. And then, the truth is once you really are, you know, if you're a year into a project that has all sorts of context on it, then, to your point, Adam, it's like your problems are extremely specific.
Yeah. Usually, hard. I find that we just have to, like even for web stuff, every once in a while, I'm just like, I guess I have to go like find an expert and hire them for a few hours to like help me figure out how to solve this problem, because like there is no findable solution on the fucking planet that I can just
talk about this.
Get a hold of. And that doesn't mean nobody has solved it, right? It just means that, because the other thing that happens too is that the value proposition of sharing knowledge keeps going down as the audience shrinks, and which is also why there's so much content for early new people, right? Mm-hmm. Or for really common problems. And there's so little for their stuff because the people who are running into those problems and are in a good place to talk about them are like, what's the point of writing this up?
For the one other person.
Only I have this problem.
Yeah, nobody else will read it, right? And so I think, so then you find yourself when you're in that space is like, so like places like the Game Maker Kitchen, as I've mentioned, which is a great Discord. Like those are the kinds of places now that I find myself going to, is like GitHub issues for the people who are writing the software that I'm trying to figure out how to use, and just like talking to those actual people, right? Or talking to other people who are just really knowledgeable about the thing and being like, hey, I'm dealing with this. Does anybody have any ideas? Mm-hmm. Because there just isn't going to be pre-existing content I can consume.
Yeah. And my understanding of like the proper way, if you have a really specific problem, is you make a Stack Overflow question asking it, and then after you have solved it, you just post an update and say, oh, I solved it, but don't actually say what you did. And that way, 7 years later, finally somebody else will have the same problem as you, and they'll be like, what in the fuck? What am I supposed to do? Mm-hmm. But you're gone. You're out of there. You've moved on.
Yeah, but we got to keep jobs. That's how we keep jobs around. You know what I mean? Let someone rediscover that, you know. That's got to pad those software
and
out.
also, like, you don't want to deprive them of the satisfaction of after 3 weeks of banging their head against a wall, finally giving up, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So
anyways,
yeah. Oh, and also, as your problems get more hyper specific, like I've had a shader problem that I've been dealing with, and I just asked ChatGPT and it solved it for me. So that's.
That's also
you don't really need to follow other game developers. You just talk to your robot buddy.
Yeah, actually,
you're good to go.
I want to avoid getting into AI again because we just keep falling back into that trap. But on that note, I do want to say this past week I was also digging into some shader stuff, and I was like, I just couldn't quite remember a bunch of things, and I had some questions. And I was like doing initially some Googling, and I was like, you know, all these different posts come up, and I'm doing the process of evaluating them and skimming them and trying to figure out where the answers to my actual questions are, blah, blah, blah. And at some point I was like, let me just go poke ChatGPT, you know? Let
me just go ask my robot buddy.
It just gave me like perfectly good and specific exact answers to my questions in seconds. And so,
man, Who knew that Googling would be too much of a pain in the ass to solve a problem, you know? Turns out it is.
Ooh.
Interesting. So, all right. Well, let's get on to the next question, which comes from Teele, who says, greetings, brothers Butterscotch. Old-time listener returning after long break here.
Welcome back.
Welcome back. My question is thus. Have you ever dealt with burnout? Butterscotch sounds like an incredible place to work, and it sounds like you all are open enough with each other to notice and address the signs. But does it still crop up?
Yeah, I think.
Yep.
Yes. After doing not the same thing, but after working, you know, in the industry for 10 years, I think if you're not trying to figure out how to deal with that, then I don't know, maybe you got a better brain than I do. You know what I mean? But that's, I think we've all been doing it with it, especially since the pandemic. I think it kind of accelerated some stuff for us. But I know, Adam, you in particular, said kind of a year or two before that, you kind of started feeling some.
Yeah, well, and there's lots of sources of burnout, right? And it's like, so the one that I like really went through, I'm pretty sure was more of an autistic burnout than it was like kind of work induced, you know? or, a combination, but I think it was like the autistic burnout's primary driver, which is really common in late diagnosed people my age, is you're just so tired, from just living in a world that wasn't designed for you, but you don't know that you're even doing that. And so there's just this like decades long trajectory of just being like everything being hard. And at some point you're just burned out now, so it took me a solid, well, that was also like that, but at that same time that started to become like a real problem was then when pandemic hit and I'm exploring things about my brain more, discover I have ADHD, discover I have autism, right? All this stuff, and start then actually managing those things, and which then let me start to, slowly climb out. And then I added antidepressants on top, which helped a whole bunch to kind of finish getting out of that hole, yeah, I mean, I think that was the main thing for me, but otherwise the main way I've avoided it is by working in our own place and getting to kind of choose how I approach the work, and then having a team, in particular Sam and Seth, be supportive of. It's like, because sometimes I just need to go do something that the studio doesn't need me to do, but I need to, because otherwise I can't work on the thing I'm supposed to be working on. Like, it's driving me, like I can't make my brain do it. And that's exactly the scenario that over time pushes you into burnout, right? It's like doing things that you don't enjoy, doing things that you don't want to do, right? Or just doing what feels like the same thing, which I think then converts into those other categories. So, so I've dealt with it, and that's kind of my technique for trying to avoid it. But I don't know if you guys have stuff to add.
Yeah, you go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, I was going to say, when I was 30, how old am I? 32, 33?
You are 33, I think.
Really? I was born in 89.
Yeah.
Is that what?
Because I'm 37 now.
You're going to be 34 this year.
There we go. Okay, yeah. So when I was 28, I went through a particularly intense period of this, where the question was, this is right before, I think it was actually smack in the middle of level head, start of level head time, where I just kept having this question just sort of get very loud in my head, which was, is this all? Which might sound weird, to people listening, if you want to do indie games or want to start your own studio and stuff, and it's like, what the fuck do you mean?
Well, it's the hedonic treadmill kind of,
yes,
baked into your brain.
Yeah, you can only make so many sprites before you're like, yeah, I get it.
Like, I've made 300 of these. Do I have to make 300 more? Yes, you do.
Yes, you do.
And then 3,000 more after that, and another 1,000.
Yeah. So I worked with a life coach guy who now works for the FBI, and it was very useful, kind of a 6 to 12 months of chatting with this guy every 2 weeks or so, basically trying to address that question, which actually at the end of the day I ended up finding to be just kind of a dumb question. It's one of those things where it's like, what is it? You get what you ask, or whatever. Like, ask a better question essentially becomes the problem.
Because the answer to is this all there is just like yes.
Well, yeah. But that's kind of irrelevant. So what are you doing?
Or even to me, questions. I was thinking a lot about the question of like people reaching their potential. It's like, have I actually reached my potential? And the answer is always yes. Always. Like, what you have done so far is what you were capable of doing, because you're always making the best decisions you can make given the time and resources and knowledge and everything else that you have, right? And you might be able to do better, going forward if you tweak some things or learn more, do things differently. But up to this point, what you've done is fine. Like, that's what you've been capable of doing.
Yeah.
And there's no reason to like moralize about it.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. So that kind of became part of it, came from the game jam we did at the start of Levelhead, which I've talked about in the podcast before, but basically where I made some really shitty jungle tiles that just didn't work, and I was crying about it. And then Seth was like, just chill out and learn how to draw leaves this weekend. And I was like, what? I can be curious about things. And that's actually what solved it for me, really enough, was it's stepping back a little bit and trying to re-inhabit that student mindset about, one, you don't know everything. So what appears to be, in the case of, like, again, once you've made 1 billion sprites, how could you be excited to make the next 1 billion sprites? And it's like, well, because each one is a very specific different thing. And that's actually very exciting.
Yeah, if you're focused on production, right? Like, just thinking about producing, like, that's what, from a work standpoint,
burns you the fuck out.
That's what burns you out, because that's basically pretending like you're a machine, right?
And you got to allow yourself to be a curious person. I think that was what did it for me a bit. And then
I think just to kind of like extrapolate that idea, to me, like all these things have one thing in common, which is essentially taking on the expectations of other people and building your time and your life and your obligations around that.
Right. Around meeting those.
Without necessarily like stepping back and so like when it comes to like the autistic burnout, so much of that is the world is set up in a certain way and you're just like, well, I gotta do it. Like I gotta do what everybody's saying that I need to do, but that's not necessarily good for you.
Yeah, it's good for me like socially, but not
all the time in all scenarios, you know. And then the same thing with like I've had this with we had a time where as we were ramping up our QA team, we were getting 30 to 40 tickets a week. And I was like, I gotta resolve these tickets. Right. Because of course, if I don't, then they just
more coming.
Then the next week there's 80, the next week there's 100. And pretty soon, how do you do it? And it was literally like a year that I just did. Like I just did resolve 30 to 40 tickets a week. And this was like early in Crashlands 2 production. And so the game was very much in flux and lots of things were like partially implemented and all that stuff. And I was getting burned out from that. But I did that for quite a while, you know, before stepping back and going like, how is this good? Like, how do we change things so that we still get QA testing, we still get everything that we need, but that I can actually
breathe,
breathe and move forward with things and not feel this sort of overwhelming pressure to do these things that are kind of being put onto my plate, right? And we just made a few adjustments to our QA process, and the rate of bugs coming in dropped by like 90%.
The quality went up.
The quality of the reports went up dramatically, and we got exactly what we needed, right? But I think it's very easy to just like put yourself into a position where you see things that other people are expecting of you, or other people are putting things on your plate. It's non-confrontational and easy to just assume that that's fine and just do it.
Yeah.
Right. But if you do that enough, then there's nothing left of yourself, right? You're just doing what everybody else is saying you need to do. And then you just kind of hollow out. And that's that kind of burnout feeling.
Yeah. There's an additional nuance here, which is it's not just what other people like you doing what other people want, because that also has been baked into your own brain, right? So that you're doing what you think you should be doing. Right. But not even necessarily what you think other people think you should be doing. Right.
That's true.
And it's assumed expectations or assumed priorities kind of top to bottom.
Yeah. And whether like that pressure is coming from you thinking somebody else thinks you should, or whether it's coming from you thinking you should, both of those are going to have come at some point from external patterning,
context.
Right? Yeah, external context. And no matter who you are, everybody's just unique in their person and their circumstance. So no matter who you are, those shoulds that have not been evaluated are basically wrong for you, right? And there's going to be something you want to investigate those shoulds. Like in Seth's case, it's like, oh well, we have a QA team. Part of my job is to make sure the game is fine. So I should be resolved. Like, I don't think Seth, were you thinking of it as like the QA team expects me to resolve these, or was it more of like a self-driven, like I should be resolving these because like
they found bugs? I mean,
because they found bugs.
Well,
my job is to fix them, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of, it's a holistic thing. It's like, you know, as a studio, we decided, hey, we want to hire these people because they're good at finding bugs and they're good at testing and stuff, right? We're paying for their services. They're giving us what we asked for. It would be insane for me to just throw it away. Like they sent me a bug report that I asked them to give. Right?
Yeah, sort of a sunk cost.
And so it's kind of like we all collectively said like, this is what we wanted. And the end result was 40-ish bug reports a week. Right. And for me to then just, if like right out of the gate, if I was like, I'm not going to fix any of these bugs, right, then it would have been wild, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so there is that kind of like, sometimes you do have to hit that point of getting burned out by something to realize like how much of a problem it is, you know, because there actually was a time where like I was kind of able to like manage that.
Well, this is where the context comes in, right? It's like the reality is usually you have to try doing stuff. You just have to be doing stuff in a particular way for a while until you've been doing it long enough that you can see what the maybe the negative patterns are that are associated with it, right? Like it's not really easy. And that's one thing I think is to your point. Like you'll see this in either organizations or teams, but I think one of the weird things is if there's not a lot of team trust, then you can have people just from the get-go, like in that case with you, like just saying, I'm not fixing these tickets. And it's like, it's not quite the time yet it's not necessarily the case to just guess that you're going to be burned out by this situation without yet participating in it. In like, give it a week or two. Like, let's kind of figure out kind of how this works. We know some stuff will happen. But I think a lot of that comes from if you don't have team trust where you can't put the brakes on. You know, all of us, I think at some point have basically pulled the brake and said, hey, this isn't working for me. We do this all the time, actually. This isn't working for me. I don't know what the fuck's going on, but I'm not having a good time.
Yeah. The trick is always not waiting
probably
too long.
Probably every like 1 to 2 months, at least one of us comes in and we're like, I'm having a bad time with something, right? And the thing is like, just because it has nothing to do with hours or whatever. Cause like you can do a game jam, work 48 hours straight through the weekend and just be hyped as fuck and just have the best time and come into the next week just cruising, right? So like the fact that you spent 48 hours straight on something doesn't mean that you're going to get burned out.
Yes.
It's what those 48 hours are made of and how those 48 hours fit into the context of something else, right? Yeah. Like, and in the case of something like the QA stuff, it's like, okay, well, if a huge number of tickets come in a week, you don't necessarily know that that's going to keep happening.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
Like, it may be like, okay, well, this is great. Like we got all these bugs coming in, right? And then you fix them all. And it's like, cool, moving on to some game features, right? And then the next week, 40 more tickets coming in. Oh no, right? And then you start to see the patterns. And then if every week you're dealing with 40 tickets, then after a while, you get burned out. And you have to be kind of in touch with what your emotional state is. And, there's always that kind of sign of like, if you find yourself not excited about getting in there and like working on your stuff, then to me, that is the sign of burnout because you're emotionally drained, right? And you need to kind of structurally change something.
And you got to stay ahead of it because
that's the biggest thing.
Yeah. With like, depending on the type of burnout and your context, because I know it's one of the, at least therapists for adult autistic people typically say that autistic burnout takes years to recover from, like fully, right? But it's also decades in the making, right? So like, so it's
it's your whole life.
Yeah, it's your whole life. But burnout in general is like that because it impacts your mood so much, and it's creating this like background of stress and anxiety, and all these things literally change your brain chemistry over time, right? And so when you're trying to resolve that, then that means you have to like slowly get your brain chemistry
process
back, right? It's a process and it's slow. And the only way to make that part not bad is just to avoid burnout in the first place, which is of course way easier said than done. But the key part of it is staying ahead of it. And that's the other part for me. Like a lot of why I've been able to stay ahead of it for work is because I have zero tolerance for doing stuff that I don't like to do, like just none. And I just refuse to. I just won't. And I have, of course, the luxury of being able to do that in the context in which we're working, because like if there's something that it needs to get done, I'll do it, but I'll find a way to do it that I can still actually enjoy. Right?
Yep.
If that takes 10 times longer than it would have, that's worth it because I'm not going to get burnt out, right?
Yeah. So if we said to Adam, like, hey, we have like just a huge pile of like files that are just full of like data that we need you to go ahead and like reorganize it and sort it into some stuff, right?
If it would not
do that manually.
No, if it would take an hour to do it manually, but a day for me to like write all the scripts and stuff to do it automatically, like I'm taking a day. That's how long it's going to take because just doing manual work like that for 1 hour will drive me so mad that it'll take me the day to recover.
Well, and I think importantly, it's that like your passion is for solving problems, not for doing a thing.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, because if you've solved a problem, then you've gained a wisdom nugget.
Yeah. I've wrinkled my brain,
If all you've done is just copy pasted shit from like one row of a database or a spreadsheet to another, and you just do that like 10,000 times, you haven't gained any new skills or learned anything. You just did a thing 10,000. Maybe you got a little bit faster at hitting Control-C, Control-V or something. But that's not very stimulating, right?
Yeah, I think there's one other aspect of this too, which I think has popped up for us on both Levelhead and on Crashlands 2, and also actually did happen with the original development of Crashlands as well, which is that working on the same project over a long project, basically, I think just massively increases the risk for all this stuff. Because you start, part of the reason why we made the game changer and even the switch to the particular art pipeline that we do now and stuff is to largely increase the amount of flexibility we have downstream, like later in dev, to continue either at pace or to continue doing like some weird shit here and there or whatever else, so that the day-to-day operation of making the game can be growing and interesting in a way that is a little different. But I think that has come at the cost of, like, on Seth's side, work on the game changer has been a completely different kind of work than previous projects that we've worked on, where it's like, it's largely about, it's almost like engine work in an interesting way. This abstraction layer of making it possible to make, say, boomerangs and mortars and creatures and whatever else, but not necessarily making them, which is very different. And I think, like other projects we've worked on with Crashlands, we made like at least 4 other games during Crashlands development, just these little seizures of having to do something else for a day or 2 or a week.
Yeah, we did a thing for, I think, was it 4 weeks? Where just like every Monday we just did a full-on game jam. Like we made a whole game start to finish every Monday, and we did that for a month while in the midst of Crashlands. Like then literally the next day we just went right back into working on Crashlands.
That was the thing. Flop Rocket and Roid Rage came out of that, right?
Yeah. Yep. And Freeway Mutant.
And some lesser ones, yes.
After a month, that was also, for me, that was too much. After a month, I was like, okay, I'm tired of that.
Out from Jesus Christ. Like we did it to avoid burnout, but then like doing that every Monday, that was too much, and we burned out from that.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of challenge just in maintaining your whole team's overall mental well-being during a very large scale project, because it's just the kind of work that I think also that we're doing. It's been of a different caliber and a different kind than our previous games, and so I think it's been heavier lifting up front.
Think about start to finish. If it takes the same amount of time to make this game as it takes to get an entire college degree, right? Except what you're doing in your college is you're going to different classes all the time, right? And you have a very specific,
for maybe 4 hours a day. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you've got a very specific known end point. And part of being in college is also like you join clubs and you do all these different things, right?
A lot of variety.
But if your 4-year college was same class, same professor, 8 hours a day,
same project,
no summers, no summer breaks, whatever.
It's a lot more like grad school, I guess, as you describe it.
Yeah, and then then at the end of the 4 years, you get your 1 grade. Right?
Yeah, you're literally describing grad school. So
so it's grad school. Yeah, right. It takes forever. There's one thing you're working toward, and for much of that time, you are years away from knowing whether or not whatever you're doing is actually like a good idea or worth it. It really takes a toll.
Yeah, it could fuck
even
you
if
up.
you've got a very good supportive environment.
Even if you love what you're doing.
Yeah, which I think has been the case for all of us. Like this, I think Crashlands 2 it's been a hard project. It's been easy in some ways, but very, very hard in most ways, I think, from a just kind of like raw development standpoint. And
which we chose. A big part of our philosophy is, we feel like if we always do what we already know how to do, or what is easy, then most of the things that we do are boring and repetitive. It's very much like the copy paste cells in a spreadsheet, right? It's like
it'll burn us out instantly.
Yeah, we're not learning stuff; we're just doing stuff. And at that point, we would then invent some new challenge, like, okay, well, what would happen if we made an entire game every week for a year? What kind of maintenance challenges? Because we would reframe the challenge at that point.
How fast can you copy paste? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and then we would burn ourselves out, that way. And so it's the hedonic treadmill calls to you, right? Like you can't escape it. You're always going to like expand to the point where you can't handle it anymore, and then you've got to kind of step back and restructure.
Stay ahead of it though. Yeah, don't wait until it's starting to collapse and then do something, right? It's just like try to practice the moment it starts to feel like I don't really want to wake up for this, you know? Like
if all you can articulate is, I'm not having that good of a time, like that.
Yep.
Not even necessarily having a bad time. If you're just like, I'm just kind of not a good time. I'm not really enthusiastic.
Yeah. You know, start investigating and see if you can restructure.
Yes. And there's a reason why the studio does a summer break and a winter break. The whole studio shuts down for those 2 long chunks of vacation time for everybody on top of everybody's other vacation days, right? And the point is that there's a common theme in, I think, both in video games, a lot of creative industries have this, but which is similar to, I think, what we just echoed, which is that it's the kind of people who have a hard time not kind of burning themselves out, basically. So yeah, we do a thing where it's like, no, the studio is done for this week. So just go, please, for the love of God, do something else for a while. You know what I mean? Like, just go do something weird, do something random. Just don't do whatever you were doing. And it always is the case. Every single time that you're coming back from break, everyone's lighter. Everyone's had some ideas about fun stuff. And there's a bit more of a playfulness back in the work, I think, in those periods immediately afterwards and then for a little bit, like a month or 2, you know, it's great. Yeah. So yeah, take your vacations, get the fuck out of Dodge, touch grass, you know, all the stuff.
Yeah.
Touch grass.
Otherwise, whether you're an employee or an employer, the most important thing is to not just like accept, but just embrace the fact that you're a person, you know, your employees are people, right? And treating people like machines who are just supposed to have like a common input output thing. And that should do it, whatever is the most like technically efficient, ignoring the fact that they're a person, is how you get both just worse outcomes, but a lot more burnout, which is, you know, worse in the long term. Because the idea of basically saying like, okay, this person needs to do this in the way that's best for them, even if it's a little slower or different or has a different non-exact outcome that I would want or whatever, right? But the thing that'll allow it to get done without long-term harm that then makes other things even harder to do, right, is to just let people be people when they are approaching their problems. Yeah.
Yep. And let yourself be a person. Yeah. You know, this applies to your own way you view yourself. So I think it's a good place to leave it for the week. We'd like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, you can just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the archives. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.